Ever wonder what keeps a global faith like this moving, with millions working towards the same goal?
It's a fascinating thing, isn't it?
We're really diving deep this time, looking at the system of authority and power at the heart of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Right at the core.
But it's not about, typical hierarchies or anything like that.
It's definitely different.
This is about priesthood, and it's unlike anything else, really.
What's really interesting is that they don't just talk about priesthood in this faith. They claim to have the only true authority on earth today because of it.
Bold statement.
And they link that authority directly to God's power, the very power, they say, that he uses to bring to pass the immortality and eternal life of everyone.
Whoa. Okay, immortality and eternal life. Those are some pretty big ideas right there. So it's a lot bigger than just, going to heaven when we die.
Oh, it's much bigger. See, these sources say that immortality and eternal life are the whole point of us even existing.
Prayer.
The entire purpose. Think about that, the grand plan God has for each of us. And priesthood, they believe, is the key. It's how he makes that happen.
Wow, so it's not just about rituals or titles then. This is connected to why we're even here, at least according to these documents.
Exactly.
That's a pretty bold claim.
It is bold. And it all comes down to this idea of restoration. They believe that sometime after the original apostles, the priesthood, the real deal, disappeared from the earth.
Okay.
And then along comes Joseph Smith in the 1800s.
Joseph Smith. Yeah, you can't really talk about this topic without him being right in the middle of it.
Exactly. They believe he received the priesthood directly. First, the Aaronic priesthood from John the Baptist himself.
Wow.
And then the Melchizedek priesthood from the apostles Peter, James, and John. So that's the lineage they're claiming, a direct connection back to those early leaders.
Going straight to the source. So, two types of priesthood then. What's the difference? Are they like levels?
Well, the source specifically says there are two parts to the priesthood, Melchizedek, which they consider the higher priesthood, and Aaronic, which they describe as preparatory.
Preparatory. Interesting word. So is it about who has more authority or something?
It's not about one being better than the other. It's not as simple as just levels of authority. Think of it more like, say, a master craftsman and their apprentice. They're both essential to the craft, but they have different roles, you see.
Right.
The source says the Melchizedek priesthood holds the right of presidency. It guides the spiritual work. The Aaronic is more about outward ordinances, like baptism, which initiates you into that covenant with God.
Ah, I see. So it's about the kind of responsibilities they each have within the system.
Yes, exactly.
But is this priesthood power something only a few people have? Is it just the top leaders in the church?
That's where things get really interesting. See, while it's true that certain keys of authority are held by leaders like the prophet and the apostles, the source is clear that priesthood power is meant to be much more widespread.
Okay.
One of their key ideas is that it can be delegated.
Delegated. Interesting.
So let's say someone is asked to serve in the church, maybe teaching a Sunday school class or leading a women's organization.
Right. A calling.
They are acting with a degree of delegated priesthood authority.
So it's not about being male or female, but about being given a responsibility and then doing it in a way that blesses others?
Yes, precisely. That's how they explain it. And that means that everyone can be unified, working together.
It's a system meant to function in a very specific way. But what does this all mean for the average person attending church each week? We're talking big concepts, but what about day-to-day life?
And that is the question, isn't it? And to understand the answer, we have to talk about covenants. Covenants, yeah, those are key.
It feels like we're moving from the organizational chart of the priesthood to how it's actually experienced.
That's a great way to put it. Remember we talked about priesthood being God's tool for bringing about immortality and eternal life.
Yeah.
Well, they say covenants are how we tap into that power in our own lives.
It's like unlocking it somehow.
It's like a key, yeah. See, they describe covenants as sacred agreements, like promises, two-way promises. God sets the terms, tells us what he asks. And when we make those covenants, try to live by them. He promises incredible blessings in return.
A true partnership.
Exactly.
And these covenants, they usually happen during specific ceremonies or rituals, right? Like the source material talks about baptism, for instance.
You're right on track there. Ordinances are really important here. They're those sacred actions performed with priesthood authority, and many of the most significant ones are all about making covenants.
So when we're talking about baptism, taking the sacrament, receiving your endowment in the temple, even being sealed there, it's more than just symbolic ritual.
It's deeper than that.
These are chances to make real binding agreements with God.
Exactly. outward signs of that inward commitment. And I think it's amazing how these ordinances often use symbols to help us understand what those covenants really mean. Take baptism.
Okay.
They say being immersed in water, that symbolizes death and rebirth.
Oh, I see.
You die to your old self, your mistakes, and you come out new, cleansed, ready to follow Christ.
Hitting the reset button. I like how they make these big concepts, these spiritual ideas, into something we can actually picture.
It makes them feel real.
It does. So much more accessible.
And that's a perfect example of how priesthood power isn't just about what happens at church, right? It's meant to flow into our everyday lives, how we see the world, how we treat each other, even how we handle tough times.
Speaking of tough times, they talk about priesthood power in families and how blessings can be given for guidance, healing, comfort. That's powerful. It makes this divine power feel available to anyone.
That's such an important point.
Yeah.
While they're very clear that men hold the priesthood authority to perform those ordinances and blessings, the power itself, that flows to everyone, women, men, and children, as they strive to live those covenants they've made.
So it's not about gender, but about how committed you are to those agreements with God.
That's the distinction. And that's what makes it so amazing.
Yeah.
Because it means everyone, no matter what they've been through, can have that same divine power to strengthen their families, receive revelation, and ultimately become more like God.
Becoming more like God, that's a huge goal.
Yeah.
How does priesthood power actually help us do that? It feels like we're going beyond just outward actions into real internal change.
You're right. It's more than just checking boxes. And that's where things get really interesting, especially when we look at how those principles work in our everyday lives.
So how does it all work? How does this power, this priesthood power we access through covenants, actually show up day to day?
Now, that's the big question.
So how does this power actually work in our lives? How does it, play out day to day?
Yeah, that's the big question. And what's amazing is the source doesn't give a step-by-step guide. It's more about principles, helping us figure out how it works for ourselves.
So it's not so much about specific things you do, but more like making sure who you are, your deepest self, lines up with these divine principles.
Exactly. Think back to what we were saying about baptism,
Okay.
that cleansing, that immersion.
Mhm.
What if we thought of our choices every day as mini baptisms?
Interesting.
Every single moment, big or small. Like choosing to have faith instead of being afraid. Choosing to help instead of being selfish. To forgive instead of holding on to anger.
Wow. Yeah.
Each choice, even the tiny ones, can be about aligning ourselves with God's will. It's about opening ourselves up to that power.
So it's not just about Sundays. It's about weaving these covenants into everything we do.
Yes, exactly. And the source says, when we do that, when we really try to live by those covenants, amazing things can happen.
Like what?
Well, you might feel a little nudge, a bit of inspiration when you're not sure what to do. Or maybe a wave of peace or strength when you're facing something really hard. It's about realizing that power is always there, supporting you, guiding you through all of it, the ups and downs.
So we're not going to be like parting any seas, but those little miracles, those moments of grace, they're showing us the power is real, that it's active in our lives.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And that's what makes it so empowering.
Yeah.
Because you, me, everyone listening, we can all be channels for that power.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So it's not just about understanding it, but about letting it work through us, making a difference.
Exactly. And I think that's something worth thinking about. If it really is that accessible, that powerful, how can you embrace it more in your everyday life? What could God do working through you if you consciously align yourself with Him, opened yourself to that power?
Those are questions we all have to answer for ourselves. But one thing's for sure, this deep dive has shown us there's so much more to learn, so much more to experience, to become.
Absolutely.
Thanks for being here with us on this journey. And until next time, keep seeking, keep striving, and keep unlocking that potential within you.